Good morning, I'm Helen. It's Thursday morning and this is Think Differently Thursday. This is my first one back after furlough. So I'm really excited, really happy to have the very lovely, the awesome, the amazing, super lovely Steve Miles. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Helen. That's a very nice introduction. Thank you very much.
Is that what you wanted me to say? Did you say that?
I think that was the right script. You missed out a couple of superlatives, but that wasn't bad. So yeah, good.
It's great to have you here, Steve. I always enjoy spending time with you and chatting to you. And we go back quite a long way, so I know you, but there'll be people listening this morning that don't know you. So do you want to just briefly tell people who you are?
Yeah, I'm Steve Miles. I'm married to one wife, which never works very well here, but I have to explain that quite clearly in Africa because people are not always sure on that. And I have a daughter who's 22. Married last year and is just at the back end of doing all the house renovations of their first home. So it's really exciting. Yeah, it's been an interesting year for us.
Fantastic. Thank goodness Lauren got married last year. Imagine if it had been this year.
We've said that so many times. It would have been right in the mid. So May the 11th, they got married. It would have been right in the middle of lockdown, shutdown, all the plans, preparations. I feel so sorry for anyone that's had to go through that. Horrendous.
Yeah. I can't believe that Lauren is married sometimes. I think you and Claire called at ours on the way back from the hospital when she'd just been born. It's like yesterday.
Yeah, I know.
So she's married. And so for you, does that mean, you can just put your feet up now and life is just easy?
Yeah,
I know
right.
That's not true because I see Instagram.
It's we've been helping them. So they've just bought their first house. They lived in a rented flat for their first year. And in end of December, they bought their first house. Complete project. Ladies lived in it from the start, 60 years, hasn't touched a single thing. No gas, no central heating, needed complete rewire, stripped down to bare bones, knock walls down. Yeah, the whole lot. We've done everything, stripped it back literally to everything and then put it back together again. So yeah, it's been good fun.
Wow. You get the best dad award, I reckon, Steve.
Well, I get the cheapest available award around. So yeah. But it's great to be able to help them. I love doing it. It's actually been really helpful for me in the midst of lockdown and a work transition for me, which perhaps we'll talk about later on, is to have something else to focus on.
Sure.
That I've had to give my full attention to outside of other challenges and pressures that we've going on, actually for me have been really healthy.
Yeah, I think people really vary, don't they? I need projects, and so in this kind of strange time, I've done some decorating and things that haven't previously
Helen.
Got done.
It's been well documented.
But yeah, I get it. It's something else to kind of focus on. Yeah. So Steve, you're a Suffolk boy originally.
Yes.
But I know that you became part of the Forge and then moved away. But tell us about your time at the Forge. What was your involvement there with us?
So I think it was 96 through to around 2002. Had been part of the church for a couple of years prior to that, and then became the kids and youth pastor, as was at the time, when it was MCF.
Yes.
Back in the day. So did that for 6 years, kind of in the process of when Sarah was diagnosed with cancer. So we kind of did that whole journey. So my role changed and transitioned quite a lot in that time, from kind of kids and youth pastor to doing that and kind of assistant pastor and stuff like that. So it was great, really exciting. Got to work with my best mate every single day.
And in fact, Steve, we sometimes get mention of you. Sometimes you get a bit of a name check on a Sunday morning, particularly if Steve is speaking and sharing stories about friendship or relationship, he'll often mention best friend Steve Miles. So for anyone that doesn't know, this is him. This is best friend Steve Miles. So what was that? Is that back from school days?
Yeah. So he was in the year above me at school. So he was kind of my wise counsel. Definitely not wild. My wise counsel at school, great friend. Kind of did, the church youth events around Suffolk and various things together. Just had a lot of great connections. I mean, kind of family connections as well, but just great buddies and have been ever since. Spent an awful lot of time together when I lived in Suffolk. But the great thing about it is we pick up like best mates, like we've seen each other last week, even though we maybe haven't seen each other for 6 months. And
Yeah,
that's the joy of great and deep friendship. And
definitely.
love the guy to bits. He's an amazing friend and an amazing church leader as well. So yeah,
Definitely. Couldn't agree more. But you must have some dirt you could dish on him. Go on. Go on.
listen,
Just for us
those of you
today.
that know Steve will know there's very little dirt to diss on Steve.
Just make something up, Steve. Just make it up.
Well, look, listen, my one long-term memory for when I worked with Steve as a church is that 2 or 3 times a year we would have like a retreat day. And we kind of went from being, got to stay in a room to actually what's our best environment to kind of work in, and being outside and connected like that was always really important. So we used to play golf in the morning and talk and discuss where we'd kind of come up with all our creative ideas. And then we would go back and then pen all of those and put some shape on those in the afternoon. But that got stopped after one occasion when I'd been playing with Steve and he was playing so badly, he just wouldn't talk to me. So we had 4 hours walking around the golf course in dead silence. And so after that, we had to change what we did on our quiet days and our retreat days. So
that's a good one. And so do you still manage to tune in to us at all? Do you see what we're up to?
I do, yeah. Look, this is the joy of lockdown and church having to be much more creative. I mean, I was tuning in anyway prior to lockdown. Used to watch the live stream stuff, which was amazing. But I'm a regular attender now on a Sunday,
Right.
and throughout the week actually, duck into the various things, whether it's on a Friday, Thursday, or a Wednesday.
Right.
And I've really enjoyed it. Loved it. Loved the creativity that you guys bring. I love the fun and the dynamism around the stuff that you're doing as well. There's some great stuff online at the moment.
Yeah.
But I love the fun and creativity around what you guys are doing. The isolation challenge is amazing. I just love it every single week. So, and the creativity and the initiative and the fun and the sense of connection and community around that I've just loved. So you get a real sense of family. I think just everyone kind of being there for each other and just enjoying it. So it's great. I love what you're doing.
Oh, that's really great that you're still kind of connected with us. That's lovely.
Yeah.
So you said that you were part of the Forge up to 2002, that sort of time. So what did you do after that? You left us, Steve. Why would you do that?
No, I was called away is kind of how I would like to put it really. Well, I was sent away actually by Sue Johnson, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of been a journey and a process really. I just had a sense that God had got other things planned for us, and we've been praying and talking quite a lot, and a number of different people had spoken into that. But I can remember a very specific day when you had Sue on, was it last week or the week before?
Yeah.
Talking about prayer. She was an amazing prayer warrior for us as a family. And she came and gave us a scripture and a verse. And I remember talking to her later. She said, I knew when I walked away from yours, I just told you to go. And it was just one of those bizarre things. Never thought that I would. Couldn't ever imagine myself living anywhere other than Suffolk. Loved working with my best mate, but had a sense that God had got other things in store. So we left 2002. We went to Birmingham, Halesowen, right from Suffolk, rural Suffolk, into urban Halesowen, and worked there for 2.5 years with a great church, Life Central, and then left there after 2.5 years and went and worked with Christians in Sport. Headed up their church partnership program for 2 years, and then mentored professional footballers for about 6 years around the UK. So yeah.
And that must have been wonderful for you, because you've got quite a footballing background, haven't you? You're a little tiny bit famous, aren't you, Steve?
Yeah, not really. Only
Tell
in my
the
own
story.
world.
Tell the story about the fame.
Only in my own world. So well, I used to play for Ipswich when I was a youngster, and had a bad head injury. Had to stop playing for quite a long while, which kind of kicked my career into touch. But then came back and played a bit of semi-pro. Got to play at Wembley in '94, so that was kind of my highlight, really. So yeah, but it was great. I can't remember the question now, Helen. Well,
I was kind of just working out what the journey had been. So Christians in Sport. So
yes.
what did that role involve? Did you meet famous people then? Were you mixing with the stars?
Yes, but they're not stars. That's the thing. They're just normal blokes. So it was just traveling around. I was, if you like, I was an independent chaplain. So like somebody who could be there outside of the club, who they could talk to, get some advice from, used to do Bible studies with them, support them in a faith journey, but also we used to talk about all sorts of things, struggles, challenges, difficulties, relationships, being dropped, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a huge privilege because people literally would just bare their soul to you. And I built some amazing relationships, some of whom I still am in touch with today, and got to journey with some fantastic people for a period of time. So yeah, it was really, really, really good.
Sounds like God's taken you on a really varied and diverse journey since leaving Suffolk. But I know that that's not what you're doing now. You're not working with Christians in Sport now. So what is it that you're involved with at present?
No, so I finished with Christians in Sport 4 years ago. So I was working with them part-time, and then we launched a brand new church in Brackley here where I live about 10 years ago. Started from scratch with just a really small team, and kind of grew and developed that. And then about 4 years ago, had an invitation to go out to Guatemala. Been doing some work with Compassion and UCB, done 3 or 4 TV documentaries. And as part of that, went out to Guatemala and stayed on for an extra week to revisit some of the projects that we'd done some filming in. Got to speak in a place called La Limonada, which is gangland Guatemala. So dangerous the police don't go there. Run by a group called Mara 18, which are one of the most notorious gangs in the world. And I was asked to go and do a lunchtime talk. So I was driven into this location, went into this church, small group of about 26, 27 guys all turned up. They just looked like they were from high school. It's like a high school youth club, but this was the gang. Like 90% of them had killed somebody. That's the only, well, all of them had, because it's the only way you could be a part of the gang. And just got to share some stuff with them about some of the stuff that I'd learned in kind of connecting in with emerging leaders before, the charity that I'm working with now, and then kind of just shared a little bit of my faith and a little bit of the gospel at the end. And 12 of the 24 stood up and gave their lives to Christ, which was amazing.
Wow.
And I can just remember when I was stood at the pulpit thinking, I feel more alive now than I've ever done at any point, stand behind a pulpit in nice, safe, white, middle-class UK. Yeah. And it'd been a journey for me, Helen, over quite a number of time, which started in Forge with the Croatia trips.
Yeah.
And then evolved in my time with Christians in Sport, went out to India, and South Africa and a number of other places, and was just faced with abject poverty in a way that I'd never known or experienced ever in my life. And it broke me, really broke me. And I just had a sense that that was a part of my story and always has been. So it was when we started the church here, and we linked up with a sex trafficking working with sex trafficking organization in Moldova. We stayed connected in with a few other projects. That's why I got involved with Compassion and their TV documentaries. And I just had a sense that that was going to be a part of my next chapter. And I think that's always been my story. So even when I was at Forge, I had a sense that there was another chapter that was evolving. I didn't know what it was. I just had to trust God in it. And I've never left anywhere because I wasn't happy. It's always been a sense of not lost, because I knew it was the right time to move on, but just with amazing, great memories as I stepped into whatever was next. And yeah, so Trevor Waldock, who I'd met while I was at the Forge, did some stuff with us as a leadership team, asked me to go out to Kenya to see the program that he'd been doing with emerging leaders, a charity that he'd started, to see whether I could evolve it and help it to grow and develop for the UK. Not with any, supposedly with any intention of me working for them. It was just to help him to recreate the program and to anglicize it. But I was.
So do you want to explain what Emerging Leaders is then? What is that organisation?
So Emerging Leaders is a NGO. It's a charity that's been running for about 10 years. We work in vulnerable communities around the world, and we help people trapped in poverty work out how to get themselves out of poverty. So it's those in vulnerable communities. How do we help unlock their human potential so that they can flourish and thrive? And so we work in about 16 countries. We are working in a lot of vulnerable communities around the world, bringing kind of grass. kind of some of the best leadership principles, life leadership principles, financial literacy, entrepreneurship training into vulnerable communities around the world, so that they can help lead themselves out of poverty. And we're doing that. We do that in partnership with Marks and Spencers, believe it or not. So they're one of our kind of primary partners. So we do work a lot in and through their supply chain into the kind of the grassroots area, smallholder farmers and places like that, which takes me back to my roots again.
Yeah,
it's very
sure.
interesting with my journey. This year we've been working with Innocent Drinks, and we're going to hopefully grow and develop our partnership with them. And then we're in kind of consultation. Well, we've been working with World Vision, Compassion, and other NGOs around the world. So, yeah,
sounds
lots
amazing.
of variety.
So you're employed by them now. So what was that transition from Trevor kind of inviting you to be part of what he was doing? You're now obviously doing this as your job. What was that transition?
This is never like a career choice for me. It wasn't like it was just, so I went out, loved the program, was hooked by it. And kind of shortly after that, Trevor offered me the opportunity to come and to get involved and to work with it. And at the time we were running the church. We started the church, we were running it, we launched it, that was our baby. We weren't going to be moving on. But I loved what I saw. I've never seen a transformation in people in a room in such a short space of time, the matter of a couple of hours. And I loved what I saw. It felt, whilst it's not a faith-based program, it felt deeply spiritual because it really touched people at their heart and their core. And so Trevor then invited me to come, and so I then left my role with Christians in Sport part-time, took on a part-time role with EL. And then after my experience in Guatemala, I had a sense that this was going to be the next chapter for me. So I went full-time with Emerging Leaders back in January 2016. Was head of training quite shortly after that. So I was head of UK, and then it was head of UK and West Africa, and then it was head of training, which sounds very grand.
I know, I'm literally in awe of you.
No, there were basically 3 of us working for the organisation. And in February this year, I took over as CEO. So Trevor, who's the founder, handed over the responsibility in the running of the organisation to me 3 weeks before a global lockdown.
Okay. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I think it's really interesting, Steve. A lot of what you've said is about taking these different paths that a few years before you would never have dreamed that was going to be the path, but you've repeatedly said about, you just had a sense that there was something else, or other people spoke to you perhaps, or you really felt God was saying. I mean, what's your advice for people that are perhaps at crossroads, or are seeking direction, or feeling unsettled, or even really settled and happy? What is it? How do we hear what God wants for us?
Well, that's the $1 million question, that, isn't it? I think I think everyone's different. So right. I think I think you've got to find out what your way of hearing from God is. Okay. So I think, so for us, what we've done constantly is, and what's worked for us is, so we journal. So write down, anything that we're thinking, that we're reading, that we're hearing, that we're watching, that we're listening to. And anything within that kind of stands out. And then, what you have to be careful with that is that if you're wanting to find something, you can find whatever you want. So what we would do would journal for a bit, and then go back at the end of each week and kind of look at what are the common themes in this. Sure. And particularly, what are the things outside of our control that align with some of the things that potentially could be more inside of our control. And then we kind of use those really as the platform then to kind of form and shape our prayers and our thoughts. So there's some of the doors then that we push on, and kind of our prayer journey and process all the time has been, if this is right, the doors will continue to open, and we will have a growing sense of peace and rightness. However challenging or difficult it might be, there'll be a growing sense of this is right. Yes, there's a kind of going to have to trust God in this, and that's always been a part of our journey. And then having the courage then to follow through on that, I think. And I can't, even looking back, I can't say that I can 100% say without doubt, every single step that we've taken has been, I know without a doubt, it was definitely God.
Okay.
I think the one time that I can definitely say that was when we left farming and we went to work for the forge.
And that was such a big thing, wasn't it, at the time?
It was huge. It was huge for
Yeah.
us. It was huge for our wider family, and the
Yeah.
implications on that for my parents,
Yeah.
who have been amazingly supportive through the whole process. But I think that journey kind of gave us a pattern. And again, the eldership at the church were amazing and supportive and helpful around that for us. That's what Steve as well, and just said, look, go away, pray about it, and then come back. We'll talk about it in a month. So there wasn't a sense of I need an answer now. And I think for me, it's often been God has kind of given the next bit right at the last moment, not like 3 months in advance. Which again that's part of that faith journey and trusting, have a sense that this is right, but you kind of got to take the step. And in the process of then taking the step, you discover whether this is then a good thing or a God thing.
And I guess there's an element of being able to call on past experience as well. The more you do it, the more you step out in faith, the more you listen to God, then you can recount those experiences, can't you? Like, we felt like this before, we felt unsure, and this is what we did, and this is where we've come to. It's a process, isn't it? A learning process.
Absolutely. And I think we've just got to find what's right for us. Other people, would say they hear audible voices, or, I wouldn't say I've ever heard an audible voice, or anything quite that dynamic.
Apart from Sue Johnson.
But it's been that, you see, God's used other people. I remember another one, Kim Burgess was another one who shared something with us in our days just prior to joining the church. And like, she didn't know, that was like in a birthday card to me, but there was like a little scripture and a little verse, and that was the one thing that's like that I needed. And so it's all of those little things along the journey that God has just given us those confirmations. So we've kind of followed our path and our heart and where our thoughts and the momentum seem to be going, but we've always looked for the kind of the God stamps in that, really, which is, I think, and they've been really important to us, because just because you're following God's path doesn't mean it's easy. And it's been quite challenging and difficult at times, and you have to go back then to, like, yes, we know that this is where God wants us to be right now, and this is the evidence that we've collected that gives us the confidence to stand in the midst of the storm and to continue to move forward. So
and I guess that's why, and I would do similarly, it's really great to have stuff written down, because when your feelings take over and your emotions, you can go back to the concrete stuff and the reality of what has been spoken into your life and what God has said, and it takes all that other fluffy stuff away at times, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really exciting. I think lots to learn from your journey. So you just said that you became CEO to Emerging Leaders, and then the world closed down. So presumably, like so many of us, you've had to adapt, and I know you're doing loads of travel, which obviously you've not been able to do. So you've just adapted and kind of carried on with the role in a different way for now?
Yes. The previous 2 years I've been out of the country 7 months of the year, traveling, training. That's what I did. That's who we are. That's what Emerging Leaders has been for 10 years. We're a face-to-face training organization, around mindset, behavior change. And a lot of that is done in dialogue. So it's not taught, it's facilitated learning process, and a lot of dynamic, creative stuff around activities and engagement and all that kind of stuff that we do. That's what the program's built around completely. So we have had to completely rethink the whole thing, still are rethinking the whole thing, and trying to work out how do we bring hope to people trapped in hopelessness in the most vulnerable communities around the world at a time when accessibility is at its all-time low. So we're having to adapt and innovate, think. There's uncertainty in that, for our funders, as well as for us at this time. But we're very thankful that we've got enough resources at the moment to enable us to be able to support the guys that are out in the field. So we have small teams out in Kenya and South Africa, and India, what we class as, so they're not employed by us but associates, and so they work with us. But that's meant that even though they've not been able to work, we've been able to support them in the field,
Okay.
which is pretty critical, because for some of them, if they don't get finance, then they don't feed, and their families don't get the support that they need. So you know, that's been part of the journey. But so it's innovate and adapt. That's the process, and that's the journey. But
and I think the thing that we've all had to do is do it quickly. I think often when you bring change to organisations, you map it out and you just take such a long time over it because it needs such careful handling. And I think the big difference here is that we've needed to all be, I think the buzzword has been agile, hasn't it? You've actually got to adapt and change very, very quickly because it needs doing now, doesn't it?
Yeah, and isn't it, I think it's interesting as well, you know, that I think this is true in the context of the church, for example, is that because that's our reality right now, everyone's like, yeah, okay, great, let's embrace change. You know, we've got to change, let's embrace change. Whereas normally, you know, to move a piano from one side of the room to the other, you've got to have 15 committee meetings and all sorts. Whereas now you can literally change something, and you know, everyone actually loves the change because it's innovation, it's creative, and the creativity that's flowing out of people at the moment, I think, is really exciting and inspiring, which just shows actually sometimes system, you know, doesn't necessarily actually allow for the greatest level of creativity. That's true in education, I think. I think that's true in the church. And you know, suddenly, you know, things that perhaps might have caused great uproar or, you know, consternation, how could we possibly not consider meeting together, is suddenly like, well, this is the new normal, so you can embrace it. Absolutely. And what's coming out of that, I think, is really exciting. And I think that's got to be one of our challenges moving forward, is how do we make sure that when the new normal becomes normal again, is that we don't just recreate new structures that limit that and restrict that. How do we stay agile? How can we stay flexible?
Yeah, definitely.
And particularly, I think, you know, for us, it's how do we reach the people in the most vulnerable communities? Technology doesn't always work because they have a choice between data or putting food on the table. Which are you going to choose? So it's, you know, okay, so what are the other methods, mechanisms? How can we use local radios, local TV stations? How can we use poster campaigns? You know, all that kind of stuff to be able to get practical skills that can help people to navigate the uncharted waters that they find themselves in at the moment.
Yeah, such interesting times that we would never have thought we would be facing, would we? Like 6 months ago, we would never have thought we would be here right now. I guess because of all of your connections in lots of different countries, you have a greater insight into how coronavirus is affecting folk. I live with my daughter who's recently spent a year in Africa, and she's a little frustrated at how little we hear. We hear about what's happening locally, we hear about what's happening across Europe and wider, but we don't hear much about African countries and how the virus is actually impacting lots of those vulnerable communities. And is that something that you've got insight into and you've got knowledge of?
Yeah, so we're in, you know, we regular contacts. We have weekly Zoom calls now with all of our kind of in-country connections, just simply to stay connected really, and to support them in a process of time and change. I think the reality is that for Africa, for Asia, that they aren't where they haven't, the disease hasn't accelerated as much there at the moment because they're not as far down the journey as us. But it's definitely picking up pace. So, you know, what's been quite, in one sense, amusing, in some senses of on the calls, they're like, oh yeah, no, we're really worried because our numbers are really high. So how many cases have you had this week? And they're like 24. And I'm like, so is what, 24 deaths? No, cases, infections.
Right.
And so you're like going, how many? Like, oh, hang on, we've had 1,057 or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think so there are a number of things for them. One, their countries reacted quite quickly and went into lockdown, which in one sense has helped to control the spread of the disease. But the implications of that then for a lot of those that are in informal work, for example, or even informal work, has been that is their sole source of not just income, but getting any kind of resources at all. So it would be, you don't have a fridge in your shack. You go down to the marketplace and you get the food that you need for the day, and then you come back and you cook it. But if you're not allowed out of your house, you can't go and get food.
Yeah.
And so there's the balance between, there's the economical impact, and we're still to see the implications of that here. But for them, there's the immediate impact of literally it's the choice of, do I go out and risk getting the infection and possibly dying, or do I stay here and risk dying of starvation? And questions that we're being asked is, how do we self-isolate when my neighbor lives, literally attached to me in a shack, which is literally a 2-inch mud wall between us, and we're all running around our kids are playing outside, and it's our lockdown is we just flick on Netflix, don't we, or zoom into another meeting, or we watch another version of Think Differently Thursdays, where Helen and our lives are better. But for them, it's it's a think differently every day for a lot of them, and I think that's the challenge. And then the concern and the anxiety, because at least we know that we have an amazing National Health Service here. And I know that for our team in India, for example, the hospitals in Delhi, which is the capital, cannot cope with the spike in cases at the moment, for example, and they're literally having to turn people away at the door. Got no more space, no more room, so you can't come in. I think there's a lot more challenges coming across the continent, both in Africa and Asia. I think they're probably about a month and a half behind us to 2 months.
Okay. Makes me feel so helpless. What can we do? Is there anything that we can be doing?
Well, I think where we have connections, we can offer support. What might seem a little can go a long way. So a friend of ours who's done some work in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, he did a marathon run recently. He went out at night and did I think he ran 52 kilometers, so a 7.5 kilometer kind of thing, about 5 times overnight. I think he's raised about £4,500, got sponsored for it, and then he's helping run feeding programs at the moment in really vulnerable parts of the world. And for some, that's what they need right now. They need resources and food. For others, they need support and encouragement. Phone call or a WhatsApp message, or whatever it might be, I think. And are there other organizations that are doing great stuff on the ground that we can get behind, support, donate money to or resources to, and get involved? So this is a global pandemic, and I think we can feel hard done by the restrictions and all that kind of stuff here, but I don't think we really know the half of it in comparison.
What Zoe was saying yesterday was that one of the results that she's hearing about is families sending their young girls off to be married as young as 10, 11, 12, because they can't cope with them in the family, but also almost for the good of the child, they're thinking, because it will mean that she'll have some food and she'll be looked after. And it's just like,
it's heart-wrenching. It really is.
It's so good to be mindful of it all. And of course, there's this kind of global catastrophe going on, and then the world at the same time has been shaken again and rocked by the death of George Floyd and multiple deaths subsequently of Black Americans at the hands of police. And this whole Black Lives Matter thing has just escalated, hasn't it, in people's minds, and just come to the fore. And I guess Emerging Leaders is very much with that whole sentiment of Black Lives Matters in empowering people and helping the vulnerable. Is it something that kind of you have felt personally challenged by as a result of what we've seen recently, or does it make a difference to the organisation, or is it quite affirming of what you're doing?
I think it's affirming in the sense of, So the message really behind the Black Lives Matter is this whole thing of equality.
Mm.
That's the big issue. It's around equality. So they're not saying Black Lives Matter, white lives don't.
No.
They're just saying, guys, we matter as well. That's really what the whole kind of heartbeat behind it is. And I think that's the key issue around what Emerging Leaders really is founded on. Is, you know, Trevor, when he started Emerging Leaders in 2006, was all around what it's not acceptable that people in various, or that you are restricted to your access to the best just simply because of where you live. And that was the driving point behind why Emerging Leaders got started, is that, you know, how do we bring the best leadership training, life leadership principles into grassroots communities so that they can get access to the best. You know, we could be very easy for us to go off and run corporate leadership and make loads of money, but actually that's not what the organization's about. It's about empowering people and bringing equality, and so it's affirming in that sense. But, you know, inequality exists all over the world. You know, it exists right here in the UK, not just about the color of the skin. I think I've been personally challenged by my lack of understanding, I think, about what it's like to live under that oppression, I think. And not just like the present oppression, but the history and the oppression of that from the past, and how that oppression is passed on from one generation to the next to the next. You feel something, and therefore your responses and your reactions to things, to situations, whether you do anything or not, is felt by those around you. And, you know, we see that in vulnerable communities around the world, is that people are literally paralyzed by hopelessness. You know, and that sense of this is our life. You know, life can never be any different to this, because it's who we are, it's what we are. I was struck when we went to Bangladesh, for example, a couple of years ago. Claire and I went out there and did some training, gender empowerment training, to try and encourage female textile workers to become supervisors or managers in some of the factories that they were working in. And the thing that struck me is, I kind of am very aware from the context perspective of, you know, there's quite a lot of male oppression in India, in Asia, full stop, but particularly India, Bangladesh. But that kind of comes from other culturally as well. It's, you know, that's not a woman's role to do that, you know, from family. So, you know, people, mums and dads wouldn't want their daughter to become a supervisor or a manager, because that's not what a woman does.
Right.
And so just kind of even trying to, those senses of equality, you know, of inequality as well, and the impact of that, why some kids get a meal and get an education but others don't, why some girls are able to go to school and others aren't because they can't get sanitary provisions, and therefore it's not possible for them to go and get an education. There is so much inequality in the world that it's you know, heartbreaking, really. Knowing just before the lockdown, I did some work in London with Crisis UK and Housing Justice, two amazing organisations working with homeless people, and just hearing their stories, and, you know, the guys that we met and that we work with. So it's part of an initiative to get them back into living accommodation and off the streets, called Move On, and we were there kind of doing some stuff around mindset and behaviour change, and hearing their sense of hopelessness and the way that they felt that they were judged and not treated well and right, even by people in places of authority who are supposed to be helping them. You know, inequality is rife, I think, and I think that's one of the things that it's challenged me around, is what are the areas of where I show inequality, if you like, you know, to other people, just by my attitude or my actions, you know, not simply just because of the color of their skin, but because of their gender, because of their ability, because of their driving capacity. You know, it's all of those things. That's really, for me, has been the thing, as this issue around that, and I think then just being able to be a voice for the voiceless, you know, being able to stand in solidarity with our, you know, our brothers and sisters who have a different skin color to us, to say, this is not okay. It's not okay that people are treated like this. It's not okay that people feel this. And you know, that's a huge shift. You know, that changing the actions is one thing, but changing the consequences of a lifetime of actions is quite amazing. I mean, I watched the that TV program. I can't remember what it's called now, which was the one about the Windrush. Did you see that on TV?
No, I didn't.
It was an amazing documentary. Is it Sitting By Me or something like that? It was a documentary about a couple of weeks ago that was a story taken, a drama from the Windrush, catastrophe a number of years back. I sat there in tears. I was horrified by what I saw, knowing that this had happened in our country,
yes,
in my lifetime, and I was completely unaware of it.
Yeah.
I heard about it even when it was kind of blown up. I heard about it on the news. Didn't do a thing. It just kind of it passed me by. Because I'm ignorant about things like that.
And that's what I'm discovering. There's too much that I've not known, and trying my best to educate myself now, and to know more, to understand more. I think that's just like the starting point, isn't it, for me, just to understand more, and then do something. It's not enough to just agree. I think we've actually got to do something now. Got to make a difference.
It's trying to listen to those who feel that oppression and feel that inequality, and then you're right, understand what can I do to help. How what is there an action that I can take? Is there someone that I can speak to? Is there a letter that I can write? No, I'm not all for smashing up shops and tearing down statues, but I think, how do we do this in a way that has a profound impact? I think one of the most powerful videos that I've seen in the last few weeks around all the Black Lives Matter movement was, there was a guy, I think of about 40, something like that, and there was another guy of about 35 who looked like they were about to have a fight, two black guys. And then this guy who was 35 pulled in a young kid of 16. And he said to the black guy, he said, listen, you've tried it. He said, I've tried it. He said, and now these guys are trying it. And he grabbed this 16-year-old. He said, you've got to do something different. He says, because we've tried this before and nothing has changed. And he literally, tears streaming down his face as he spoke about that. He's just imploring this young man, look, the way we've gone about it, smashing up stuff, fighting, rioting, all that kind of stuff, it hasn't changed a thing.
No. And yet every generation has said to their children, oh, it will be different for you, it will be different for you, and it still isn't. And I've watched lots of documentaries with Zoe, and at times, watching stuff from the 30s or 40s, it's like watching what's happening now, and you think, how can this still be happening now? Just terrible.
It's a big part about what we do in a lot of the trainings and the context where we go into, is that the premise behind it is that without mindset change, the story stays the same. But if when you start to change someone's thinking, then you start to change their life, literally. When they start to change their thinking, they change their lives, because our thoughts affect our feelings, which affect our actions. So actually what we focus on often is our actions and what we're doing, but actually the driver for those actions is our thoughts. So actually, if we focus more on what is it I'm thinking, that then controls how I feel, that affects how I act. And if we pay attention to the if you like, the negative, destructive mindsets in our own ways that we think about ourselves or about others or about situations, actually it then affects how we feel, which then affects how we act. And again, one of the analogies we use on all of our training is we use a pen. And we talk about the fact that every single day the story of our lives is being written. The question is, who's got the pen? And for many people, they've given away the pen, or the pen has been taken from them. So what does it look like for you to pick up the pen and to write the amazing story that you want to write with your life? And start today. Don't wait for things to change. Be the person that's going to start to script things differently.
It's so interesting talking to you, Steve, and I think we're at a point, aren't we, where so much is changing and so much won't go back to what it was before.
I hope not, Helen.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that you are fond of us as a church, and we you know, obviously are having discussions about what does church look like after this, and that question of, do we go back to what it was, or do we change? What's your thoughts on what the church looks like, the church looks like after Corona?
That is $1 million question. I think I alluded to it earlier. I think we've been able to accelerate change rapidly. We've had to let go of things quickly, and work out what's right for right now, and then just do it.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think that's what the church in essence needs to hold on to, is to keep asking that question. What's needed right now? And my hunch is it will be a combination of, so I think people will meet back together again, and they'll, but I think this whole embracing this new way of reaching out and engaging with people, I talked about this before, is, the way that we can connect people in so much, reach people that we couldn't reach before. And church has always, the 6 o'clock service, for example, that you and I grew up with, they've got 6 o'clock gospel service. It only ever placed at 6 o'clock because that was the only hour in the week when the servants from a lot of the communities around were released from work to go and to leave their workplace. And so they had the 6 o'clock. So the church at that point, when's the best time to hold church? Well, it's at 6 o'clock because that's the only time that workers are free. But we're like, it's like, no, you can't do away with the 6 o'clock service. It's like, well, but that's not relevant to our time now. And so I think all the time is asking that question: how do we stay relevant? And how do we stay connected? And how can we continue to be church, not just do church?
Absolutely.
And I think if we wrestle with some of those things, I think, look, we've learned I think with this process is that actually it's okay to let go of some things. And the things that we lose that we think are really important, actually we discover are not so much.
I think things often are right for a time, aren't they? But we have a tendency, particularly I think if things are working well, we want to hold on to them. But I think, things are right for a time, and then it's a time to let go. And it comes back to that whole thing of stepping out in faith as well, I think, at times, and taking a risk if you feel that's where God is taking you.
And I think I mean, we had this as kind of one of our values as a church when we started our church here, is let's try and believe the best rather than perceive the worst.
Right.
Everyone's intentions, decisions that you make and things that you try or not try and everything is I know Steve's heart is an amazing friend and an incredible leader, but that goes for the whole team, in Forge, is, we often jump to conclusions and to perceptions too quickly. Actually, if our leaning is towards, let's believe the best in somebody for something and about a decision that's been made, rather than the worst. And let's suspend judgment on the front end. Goodness me, we're learning that so much about, people's responses to the government and all that kind of stuff. And I wouldn't, I'm not saying I'm for or against Boris, but I wouldn't want to be in his shoes or any of their shoes. And I think,
because it's all paths that no one's navigated before, isn't it? Everyone's learning.
I think grace has to be our driver and our fuel in all of this, really. So so I think keep being creative, keep innovating, and keep. I think the questions that we've all had to ask ourselves is, how do we do this best now? And I think if you keep that at the forefront of everything all the time, then the church will continue to evolve in a way that's positive. It's when we don't and we think that we've solved it and we're sorted. Suddenly, then when we stand still,
you get complacent.
Well, we get complacent, but I think we actually start to move back. We don't stand still. That's the point, because the world continues to move on, and if we don't move on with it, we will get left behind.
Steve, it's really great to speak to you. I'm so grateful for your time, and I think you've got so much insight into what's going on in the world, and the way you've talked about change in your own life, but about your organisation and churches as well is really insightful. I really appreciate your time this morning. And as always, really, really lovely to chat to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. I'll let you get back to your DIY.
Thank you.